The night my husband introduced his mistress as his future, I was sitting beside a donor who had just praised my fellowship proposal twice. Graham Calder stood beneath the amber chandeliers of Alder House, one hand around his glass, smiling like the room still belonged to him. I watched his thumb brush the note cards I had edited that morning, and something inside me went quiet instead of breaking open. He thanked the board, the artists, and the donors, then glanced at me so briefly I felt myself become furniture in my life. Lila Voss sat 3 chairs away in a red dress too loud for a fundraising dinner, her fingers resting on a cream folder. I recognized that folder before I noticed the ring, because the corner tab matched the draft packet I had built for our fellowship launch. Graham inhaled, like he was preparing to announce a program expansion. But Lila rose first, polished and bright, stealing the pause he needed. "Graham and I are building an honest future together," she announced, lifting her hand, while the whole room turned toward me for damage. No one looked at the folder except me, and maybe that was the first real mistake they made in that beautiful room tonight. The first paragraph on her top page carried my cadence, my donor language, even the phrase I had written after 3 sleepless revisions. Graham kept his face arranged into sympathy, the kind men wear when they want witnesses to mistake careful cruelty for painful courage. I placed my glass on the linen without making a sound, because sound was exactly what they had planned to use against me. Lila smiled wider, waiting for tears, waiting for a scene, waiting for the quiet wife everyone overlooked to finally become inconvenient in public. I looked at Graham, then at the stolen speech in Lila's hand, and understood this was not an affair making itself public. It was a replacement plan, wearing a diamond, and every person in that room was being asked to applaud the woman taking credit. "Hope you kept the original draft," I answered, calm enough for Graham's smile to slip before the first nervous clap even started. I did not follow Graham into the parking lot, and I did not give Lila the public collapse she had dressed for. I walked past the coat check with my phone face down in my palm, while conversations bent away from me like guilty paper. Outside, Portland rain had softened the sidewalk, and my reflection in the black glass looked steadier than my hands felt. I sat behind the wheel for 7 full breaths, then drove to Alder House instead of driving home. The side entrance still accepted my badge, because no one had bothered removing the woman they thought would disappear politely. Inside, the offices were dark except for the storage room, where old grant folders and donor packets sat under fluorescent light. The copier smelled like warm dust, and my fingers shook once before I opened the fellowship archive on the shared system. I downloaded the first proposal with my name, the revised packet with my credit softened, and the access log showing Graham's account opening restricted folders. The next file made my stomach turn colder than the ring ever had, because Lila had already emailed a donor. She wrote that I was stepping back for personal reasons, and that she would help provide leadership visibility during the transition. That phrase was so clean it almost hid the dirt, which was probably why Graham had approved it without blinking. I saved the email as a PDF, exported the metadata, and called Celeste Moreland before anger could make me careless. Celeste did not ask if I was okay, because lawyers and real friends know when a useless question wastes oxygen. "Preserve everything. Post nothing," she warned, while I scanned the speech packet and watched my name disappear across 3 drafts. Graham's text arrived before I finished, telling me I was making this harder than it needed to be. Lila followed with a statement calling it a private relationship issue being dragged into the institution, and I forwarded both messages to Celeste. By the time the storage room clock passed midnight, the ring had become the least interesting thing Lila had shown that room. Rings could be explained away with ugly words like love, timing, confusion, and all the little excuses adults use when shame needs furniture. The credit line could not be softened that way, because my name had been removed from work that still carried my fingerprints. I opened every draft in order, and the betrayal became less emotional with each timestamp, which somehow made it worse. The earliest proposal listed me as founding director, with Graham reviewing donor language and Lila nowhere near the document history. 2 weeks later, my title became program advisor, then internal contributor, then vanished under a note about public-facing transition. I found the memo Graham had never sent to the full board, proposing that I step back because of personal transition. That phrase was polished enough to pass through a meeting, and dirty enough to tell me exactly who had written it. Lila's prepared donor email sat beneath it, already thanking supporters for trusting her expanded visibility role. I forwarded the files to Peter Ashcombe before dawn, not with a speech, not with a plea, but with 3 attachments he could not ignore. The original proposal had my name on every page footer. The revised packet carried Lila's language over my structure, and Graham's access log connected them cleanly. Peter called 20 minutes later, voice lower than I had ever heard it, asking whether this was truly about program materials. It stopped being about my marriage when your donor list became part of their plan, I answered, watching the printer wake up behind me. For the first time that night, I understood why Graham had wanted tears from me at the gala. If I broke loudly, he could make my pain the story and bury the paperwork under sympathy for himself. If I stayed quiet, the documents had room to breathe, and every clean little phrase they used started sounding rehearsed. I printed the memo, the donor email, and the draft history, then stacked them into one plain folder. By sunrise, the affair had lost its glitter, and what remained was a workplace scheme with lipstick on it. The board meeting happened inside the West Gallery, where Graham's old program posters still hung like framed evidence nobody had noticed. His name sat bold across every print, while mine appeared smaller near the bottom, polite enough to be ignored. Peter Ashcombe stood near the table, older than he had looked during the gala, with Celeste Moreland beside him. I took the chair across from Graham, and for once, he had to look at the woman whose work carried him. Graham arrived 5 minutes late, wearing the calm face he used when donors needed reassurance more than answers. He glanced at the folders, then at Peter, avoiding me until the silence made his confidence look borrowed. "This feels unnecessary," he breathed, smoothing his cuff like polish could replace proof in a room built around paper. Celeste opened the first folder, and the room changed when the proposal appeared, with my name printed across every footer. She placed the consultant contract beside it, then the donor policy, the access log, and Lila's email announcing her visibility role. Graham leaned back too quickly, and that movement told me he had expected hurt feelings, not a clean paper trail. Peter read the email twice, his mouth tightening at the phrase "personal reasons," because softness suddenly looked less like kindness. "Why did Lila have this donor language before board approval?" Peter pressed, and Graham's eyes moved toward the window. "She helped polish the message," Graham answered, gentle enough for a dinner table, but too thin for the room. Celeste did not raise her voice, only tapped the agreement where confidentiality sat in plain language. Polish does not include changing author credit, accessing restricted materials, or presenting an unapproved role to donors, she answered. I watched Graham's face harden when he realized the meeting was not about forgiveness. He turned toward me, voice low, with the private warning he used whenever witnesses were close enough. "Marin, you're confusing a painful marriage with institutional work," he tried, giving Peter the kind of sentence meant to sound reasonable. I folded my hands over the folder and kept my tone flat enough to leave no room for pity. "No, Graham, you used institutional work to hide a painful marriage, and then you gave my name away with it." Peter closed the folder and suspended him from representing the fellowship during review. The second gala returned us to the same room, which made every polished glass and folded place card feel less innocent. Alderhouse had called it the Fellowship Launch, but everyone understood the air had changed since Graham's suspension. Lila arrived in another expensive dress, softer this time, as if a quieter color could make her look misunderstood instead of prepared. Graham stood near the back wall without his old circle around him, pretending privacy was a choice and not a consequence. I came in with one folder, one black dress, and no desire to perform the kind of pain people could gossip over later. The donors watched me with cautious faces, the way people watch a woman after learning they misread her in public. Peter stepped to the front and thanked the room for supporting the fellowship, his voice steadier than it had been in the gallery. He did not mention scandal, marriage, or Lila's ring, because the truth on that stage did not need decoration. He turned toward me and called my name with the title Graham had spent months trying to erase. Marin Ellison, founding director of the fellowship program, he announced, and the room went still before anyone remembered to clap. The screen behind him showed the original proposal, my footer on every page, the draft history, and the corrected credit line. Lila's face lost color when her gala speech appeared beside my earlier language, sentence after sentence too close to pretend coincidence. I walked to the front without looking at Graham, because his reaction had stopped being the center of my life. Some women do not lose their seat. I began, feeling the folder steady beneath my hand as the room listened harder. They simply stop letting someone else sit in it and call that politeness. A donor in the second row lowered her eyes to the printed program, where my name finally stood where it belonged. Lila moved toward the side exit before the applause settled. But she had chosen the wrong room to disappear from twice. The same major donor she had emailed for visibility stepped into her path with a voice calm enough to hurt. I trusted the woman who built the program, not the woman who borrowed her words, she told Lila, and nobody rushed to soften it. Graham looked down then, not at me, but at the floor between us, where his old version of the story had finally run out of room. Alderhouse released its statement the next morning, with the kind of careful language institutions use when panic has been dressed in policy. Graham Calder was placed on administrative leave pending review of program materials, donor communications, and attribution protocols connected to the fellowship launch. Lila Voss's consulting agreement ended before lunch, not with fireworks, but with one email citing confidentiality and misrepresentation. Those words looked dry on paper, yet they closed more doors than any insult I could have thrown. Graham did not collapse in public, which made the consequences feel more real than drama ever could. A panel invitation disappeared first. Then a gallery postponed his guest curator talk. Then a local arts magazine quietly removed his profile from its homepage. The man who had lived on warm introductions and borrowed language suddenly became a risk nobody wanted near their donors. Lila fell faster because consultants live on trust. And one forwarded email, one donor list, and one stolen credit line made every client imagine their own name being mishandled. I received apologies from people who had watched me sit through the first gala without knowing what they were really seeing. Some were careful, some were embarrassed, and a few tried to sound as if they had suspected Graham all along. I answered only the ones that did not require me to comfort the person apologizing. The rest stayed unread, because I had already spent enough years making other people feel better about what they chose not to notice. By then, I understood that public correction did not erase private exhaustion. That evening, I went home to the hallway where our wedding photo still hung in its silver frame. I did not smash it, because the loud version of grief had already been written for me by people who misunderstood silence. I turned the frame face down inside a cardboard box, then sat on the kitchen floor while my body finally admitted it was tired. Dana Mercer arrived with soup, kicked off her shoes, and set the container beside me without asking for a performance. "Eat first," she murmured, sitting on the tile. "Be powerful later." The board offered to restore the fellowship under its old structure, but the old structure had taught people how to erase me politely. I sat across from Peter Ashcombe with the corrected program in front of us, my name finally printed where it belonged. Still, I could not ignore the posters, the drafts, and the years when louder people stood under work they never built. I am not coming back to the same room, I told him, because survival was not the same as repair. By the end of that week, every proposal required an attribution record, and every donor update needed 2 approvals before leaving Alder House. Consultant contracts were rewritten with plain confidentiality language, not the soft wording people used when they expected women to stay grateful. Program materials could no longer be revised without version history attached, and credit lines could not be changed through hallway favors. Peter signed each policy with the face of a man realizing that politeness had been covering negligence for years. I called the new fellowship the Front Room Initiative, because I was done building beautiful things from spaces nobody credited. It would support women who ran workshops, libraries, community arts programs, and public events while being mislabeled as support. The launch announcement named every coordinator, educator, and organizer in full, because recognition should not depend on who held the microphone. Dana read the draft at my kitchen table and smiled softly, saying, "That sounds like a room with better locks." Graham sent one handwritten letter through the mail, claiming he had lost everything and wanted to speak like adults. I left it sealed until Celeste confirmed every separation matter would move through council, then placed it in the legal folder. There was no meeting, no last conversation, no hallway scene where he could borrow my compassion for one final performance. Lila posted that she had been dragged into something larger than herself, but an artist shared the draft where my name disappeared. That screenshot did what outrage never needed to do, because evidence speaks cleaner when people finally know how to read it. Her statement vanished within hours, and invitations that once chased her glossy confidence started finding other consultants. I did not celebrate either of them, but I stopped making my healing wait for their consequences to finish arriving. The life I wanted was not the one they had cracked open, so I built a better room and kept the front door mine. The Front Room Initiative opened inside a Portland library, not a ballroom, and somehow that made the night feel cleaner than any gala. Women filled the rows with notebooks, grant drafts, workshop flyers, and name tags printed with full titles nobody had shortened for convenience. I stood before them with my own name on the poster behind me, not borrowed, not corrected, not hidden under someone louder. A young organizer near the front asked if I regretted staying calm that first night, when Graham and Lila thought silence meant surrender. I looked at the poster, then at the women whose names would never be treated like footnotes in this room. "No," I answered, letting the truth land gently. I needed them comfortable enough to leave fingerprints on everything they thought I would never check. Dana smiled from the back, and for the first time in months, my chest felt open without needing to prove anything. I left the library under soft rain, carrying no marriage, no old version of myself, and no apology for finally taking up space. Thank you for staying with Marin's story until the end, especially if some part of her silence felt familiar. Tell me what moment stayed with you most, and share this with someone who needs peace after being underestimated. May your next chapter feel honest, steady, and fully yours.